All right, so let's get started. Thanks for joining me. We're ready to talk about Visual Studio 2012's new Test Explorer. This is a pretty big divergence from 2010, a pretty major rewrite of the testing infrastructure that's used inside of Visual Studio, and even that's available outside of Visual Studio. My name is Ryan Cromwell. I work for a company called Applied Information Sciences. We're kind of all over the map. Our headquarters are in Reston, Virginia. My office is located in Dayton, Ohio, kind of halfway between Cincinnati and Columbus, but we have offices in Columbia, Maryland, the Carolinas, out in Texas, Hyderabad, uh, looking to open some others as well. Uh, I personally am a coder by trade. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I work on shipping products with my team members. Have been for a little over 10, 11, going on 12 years now, I guess. I'm also an agile coach, so over the last 3, 4, 5 years, I've been working with organizations and teams on adopting agile practices and principles, specifically around the world of Scrum. I am a Scrum.org trainer, providing the Professional Scrum Foundations course, as well as the Professional Scrum Developer course, uh, for which a lot of the topics we're going to talk about today are applicable. We drill into a lot of these things in more depth in that Professional Scrum Developer course for .NET. I'm also a Microsoft ALM MVP, where ALM stands for Application Lifecycle Management. That's the umbrella that covers Visual Studio, Team Foundation Server, and Team Foundation Service at the Microsoft in the Microsoft world. So what are we going to look at today? First off, we'll look at 2010 and some of the problems or pains that existed in the testing infrastructure that was there, the testing tools that existed for your average coder. uh, what what's gone, so what's no longer there in 2012, where it's moved or where you're kind of where people are tending to go or where it's kind of anticipated people will go. We'll also look at the actual Test Explorer. We'll play with it. We'll talk about how you can use it and what's so exciting about it. We'll also take a look at how you can use Test Explorer to kind of narrow and expand uh, the focus of your tests and your code as you're at different points in the development, I guess the development of your product or your projects or your features, and how that applies to this idea of the testing pyramid or the testing triangle. So, pains that we had back in 2010. First off, one of the big problems that really existed in MSTest, as it was called, was that the runner only worked with MSTest attributes. There were a number of precursors to MSTest, specifically NUnit and the XUnit family of tests, testing infrastructure. In fact, there is actually an XUnit, and none of those would work with the MSTest runner. So you kind of had to you were either all in or you were out. You were kind of shut out using one of the other test runners, which many of them were very good. The ReSharper test runner is very good. The ones from the Telerik group is very good. TestDriven.net was great. Um, there's the Galileo runners that are out there as well. But in order to use some of those other testing frameworks, which were really good and really innovative, things like SpecFlow and the new theory fact infrastructure that came with XUnit and things like that. You had to leave this entire experience, and it wasn't very discoverable for a lot of organizations. And let's face it, a lot of organizations still have very command and control infrastructures command and control structures where if you weren't using something that was kind of out of the box from the Microsoft world, you were left out of the game. And we want, you of course want the best tools in people's hands. One of the other complaints was that MSTest was slow. Whether it was or it wasn't actually slow at executing individual tests is up to debate, but the overall experience that you felt when using MSTest was it was slow, and that was very valid. It was not fast from the experience that you got when you used it, and we don't want that. You want to make sure that running your tests is as easy as possible, so you do it as often as you can. Then there's team build. So the team build, anything that did not have to do with MSTest, you were in for a world of hurt. Certainly, MVPs like Richard Banks provided some really cool ways of running things like NUnit or XUnit and publishing. I think he was a fan of MBUnit, if I remember correctly, and publishing those results back to TFS. You could do it, but it required a lot of work. What we want to make sure is that it's easy to integrate these other testing frameworks because they are really good into team build as easily as possible. Then there were test lists. And test lists were the MSTest way of partitioning tests. There were a couple other ways, but test lists were a pain. They were inclusive, so you had to add new tests in there explicitly. It was painful, and anybody who tried to do it on a long-term basis really felt that pain. And then, as I've mentioned, there's been a lot of innovation around testing. Uh, we're targeting new platforms. JavaScript testing is huge. If you're not doing it, you should be testing your JavaScript with things like Jasmine or QUnit, and MSTest really very easily has been showing its age over the last couple of years. So one of the things that happened was in 2012, there was this kind of theme called raving fans or raving developers. And a part of that was this guy, Peter Provost, who works as, I believe, a program manager is his title on the Visual Studio team. If you go out to his blog, you'll know, and if you've ever met him, he's big into the software craftsmanship movement. He is a part of what used to be called the AltNet or Alt.NET community, and he really had his heart set on making sure that developers had out of the box and readily available to them the best tools, pushing them or coercing them or suggesting better ways of developing software. And that included making sure they had great testing tools in front of them. That doesn't mean they weren't available from the community, but he wanted to make sure that every developer who picked up Visual Studio had the right tools in their hands. And so with that, the team, and I'm sure there were other people involved, I don't know them all. And so what came out of that was Test Explorer, a rewrite of the test runner, MSTest test runner, to what we now see as Test Explorer. And certainly with this comes this idea of, if you've heard about it, the new update frequency or cadence of Visual Studio. Visual Studio is going to be updating and shipping quarterly updates. In fact, the first update, Update 1, came out, I believe it was November 26th or somewhere around that time, and it actually expanded the functionality that was available in Test Explorer and is going to be a big part of what we talk about when it comes to this testing triangle testing pyramid and expanding and contracting that feedback loop around your tests. So what's gone? Where did things move, and where do we go now, I guess, if you were using some of that stuff in Visual Studio 2010? So test lists, forget about them, breathe a sigh of relief, and head over towards categories and traits, as they're going to be called. We'll talk more about that, but these provide a better kind of a multi-focal way of building conventions around your tests and different annotating your tests, if you will, and using those annotations to target the types of tests you want to run in different scenarios. The data source attribute. This is an attribute that you could put on top of tests to point a test at a database or data tables to pull data down and use those to iterate over. It was like row tests in NUnit. Well, go use NUnit, go use XUnit. I'm sure you can come up with better ways of doing this inside your tests. Maybe these were pointing out opportunities to do things like load tests or different scenarios. XUnit has a neat little fact scenario or fact setup that's kind of neat, theories and facts that you might play with. MBUnit also has row tests. Private accessors, the ability to execute and run and verify things that were private. This is gone, and I say good riddance. I think we were ignoring the symptoms, or the signals, I should say. The private accessors were kind of the hole that we were using, or the filling for a hole that we felt we had. I believe in a lot of cases that was showing symptoms of bad design, that maybe we needed to find a better way to organize our code to be testable and things along that line. If you need to, if you really have to, if you feel like private accessors or executing and verifying things under the covers are necessary, you always have reflection available to you. And you also have, there's another attribute called internals visible to, so you can, in the caller can be kind of opted in to seeing the internal members of an assembly. You can take a look at that. Test impact analysis. This was a really cool theoretical feature. I really, tried to use it and wanted to love it, but on the developer workstation, on the developer experience, that kind of hands-on, in the mode, in the groove of coding, it wasn't quite fast enough to work out as we hoped it would. And so, that's kind of been removed. Now, at the longer end scale of tests, on build or in continuous integration and MTM, test impact still has a place, but in the Visual Studio, as a mechanism for finding what tests I should run and being able to run just that small set early and then expand out as I move forward. That's not there anymore, and you'll see how some of that stuff is built into the new Test Explorer in a kind of a much better way. Then there's the test view and the many windows that came along with running tests in 2010. A lot of that's been consolidated into hopefully a better experience in Test Explorer. I like it a lot better. We'll take a look at that. Now I say all this stuff is gone, but it's in most cases it's just you can't create those things anymore or expand those things too much in 2012. Um, Now Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1 introduced backwards compatibility for 2012. So you can, in a lot of cases, round trip Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1 projects and solutions with 2012 back and forth. So if you created a project that has test lists in 2010, you can pull those into 2012 and still use them and edit them, but you're not going to be creating new test lists. You're not going to be, hopefully you'll be slowly moving away from test lists to using categories and traits. Same goes with some of the other ones, except of course Test Impact. All right, so let's take a look at Test Explorer. So here I've got Visual Studio 2012 open. It's got Update 1 installed, and I've got an MVC application. I did that because I wanted to jump in and look at the new templates that are available. So if you remember in 2010, you used to have to go in here and jump in and create specifically a test project. And in that, you'd create your unit tests. And if you ever created unit tests in like a class library, Visual Studio would never see them. Well, that's changed. So there exists a coded UI test, a unit test project, and a web performance test, but you don't really have to use them. These are just kind of your getting started templates for projects. You can now just create a regular class library. You can use console. You can use anything you want. The discovery of tests is open to project types. In fact, it'll find them in any project type, or at least most of the plugins for the new Test Explorer will find those there. All right, so let's create a class library. Oops, we don't want to create a new project. We want to add a new project. Subtle difference. So add new project, class library, and we'll call these, just our tests project. So it's going to give me, of course, a new class because that's what class projects do. And we're going to start to add a test class attribute here. And of course, if you're familiar with this, that's the attribute that's in MSTest. And we'll just start out there. So we need to add a reference. So what we're going to do is come in and add a reference, and we'll go down to Browse and look at our recent items. Oh, not Browse, I'm sorry. Assemblies, and our recent assemblies. Now you'll notice here that this says, let me expand this, the test framework 10.1. If you go and search for this in the framework, and maybe I should just show you this, and type unit here, test, you notice that I actually get like 5 unit test assemblies. Be careful which one you choose. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but you'll notice the file version over here, they're all 10.1 or 10.0, but then there's the 11.0. If I jump up here to this other 10.1 here, that's a 10.0. What you really want is probably this 11.0. So we'll grab that, we'll check it, and we'll click OK. So now I've got that listed in my project of references. We can collapse that guy. All right, so if I come back over here to my class 1, I can let ReSharper fill in my using statements for me, and then I can start to add a test method, public void. Now I'm going to prefix all these tests with MS because I want to show you how the new Test Explorer is extensible. You can use NUnit, MSTest, XUnit, MBUnit, all side by side. You can even have, and we'll show this in a minute, JavaScript tests kind of side by side, running side by side in Test Explorer with your compiled code. So we'll run MSTest 1, and we're going to go ahead and build this. So I now have a test, my Test Explorer window, which I have currently here sitting side by side with Solution Explorer. You can always find this up in the Quick Launch bar. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Z. If you notice that right up here, Quick Launch bar. The Quick Launch bar is really easy access to menus or commands that you've never found before. So if I just type test ex, it shows me, hey, Test Explorer, but then all of these other options. This is a really useful tool. Hey, there's Chutzpah, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if I click that, it's going to bring up the Test Explorer window, and look at that, it's already got my MS test in there. And then it's actually got it grouped by this thing called no traits. I'm going to switch the view here and group by outcome, and we'll talk about what traits are in a couple minutes. And you can see that it says no tests run. So what I can do is I can just run it all, and I can just hit this button over here. I can hit Control R, A to run all tests in the solution, and then it'll run it. So your commands, keyboard shortcuts still apply. And so there's my MS test. And we can add a couple in here. Method MS test 2. We'll just show one that fails, assert, fail. If I build that real quick. So as soon as I build, I'm hitting Control Shift B to build, it finds my new test. And that's kind of cool. So I can run this again. Control RA would run it. And that one failed. Well, this is getting really old. I'm tired of hitting run all or my keyboard shortcut. I'd much rather have it build every time or run the test every time I build, and we can have it do that. So we get this idea of continuous testing in here. So I'm just going to click this button up here. You can also find it in here with run tests after build. So it sees that on there in the test settings. You can always click that. And so now every time I build, you'll find that it runs them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that line, build, and hey, look, it ran my test, and we're good to go. Get rid of my namespaces up here. All right, so I mentioned that you can have NUnit, MSTest, and the other one side by side. So what I'm going to do is really quick, back in my Solution Explorer, I'm going to actually add in some NUnit tests. To do that, I'm going to pull in the NuGet package by jumping into the Package Manager console, install -package. Now you could also do this obviously by right-clicking on the project and managing your NuGet references. I'll just do this by hand. Add NUnit. Notice the default project up here is tests. Be careful of that. You can always put the project name in here. I like to do that just to be sure, so that I get into the good habit of targeting the right project. So what it's going to go do is pull that in that NuGet package and install it. And once it's got that in there, we can start to add a new class in there. All right, so I now have my NUnit reference in here alongside my Visual Studio MS Test references, and so I can add a new class, project, and new class. Hit C. We'll call this NUnit tests. Get rid of our unneeded things here. Now, so this certainly needs to be public so that they can be discovered. In NUnit, these are of course fixtures. So hit test fixture, and we'll add a test. That's the attribute here. Public void NUnit test1, and we'll build. Remember, we have build all our tests on, or run our tests on build. I'm going to make this fail just so it pops out a little bit. Fail. We'll build. And look, it opened up Test Explorer, ran it. I didn't run that. I didn't open that window. We'll delete that. We'll delete that line, build it again, and it's passing. So this is a really good feedback loop. Get in the habit of not just saving your files, but actually building. Control Shift B is your friend. All right, let's add a couple more tests in here, just to set us up. NUnit test 2. And this is actually going to be, we're going to pretend this is kind of a slow test. Maybe this is integration. Maybe this calls to the database. You want to find out what that's like. The other test up here might have been a pure unit test with mocks or whatever, fakes and things along that line. But here we want to go end to end between this component and database or some other component, so it's a little slower. And we want to emulate that. So we're going to bring in thread, sleep, and we'll sleep for, let's say, 3 seconds. Pretty egregious. So when I build, now I've got this test in here that's going to be slow, and so it's always going to slow down my feedback loop. Now I want to let people know about that. So what do I have at my disposal to tell people about that? So now it's running, and you can see it's taking much longer, but it did run. What I can do is I can organize these different types of tests, all the different tests, with things like categories and traits, as I mentioned. So I can mark this one here as a test. We'll use property. And notice here that property is an NUnit thing. It's an NUnit framework attribute. It's not something that's inside of Visual Studio. So a lot of the different test frameworks like NUnit, XUnit, SpecFlow is a good example, have different ways of annotating tests for different pieces of information. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here for you a little bit so you can see this a little better. So they have different ways of annotating tests. So, and the Test Explorer, um, we'll just call this speed slow. So what this has done is Test Explorer is actually surfacing these as what it calls traits, which is kind of this abstract concept for name value pairs and such. Um, so here we've got the speed slow test and then the other ones with no traits at all. We also can use category, which is kind of like a common built-in category. So we can call this integration. You might also have a property in here just called, team or layer or feature area. Maybe this is our UX or um, DAL. Let's use that. And so what now I've got is the same test showing up in multiple areas, right here, right here, and right here. Does that mean it's going to run 3 times? No. The cumulative time over here is not 9 seconds. It's still 3. It's just surfacing this information in 3 different places. All right, so let's go up here and we'll just call this category BVT. Okay, it's our build verification test. And I'm going to use that over in our this test here, but in this particular case, it's not going to be, I'm not going to use the NUnit category. I'm going to use the one that's built into MSTest. So it's unit testing, testing category attribute. Test category BVT. We'll put that down here as well. So now look, I've got BVT with 2 tests here, but notice that NUnit has surfaced this as an actual trait, a name value pair, rather than a kind of a first class category. What you'll find is that the different adapters that are available for Visual Studio's new test runner, you kind of have to opt in the right way. And there's going to be some differences in a couple of different places. So what I'm going to do is here, instead of using test category, because it's not consistent and it doesn't help me here, I'm going to use test property, call this category. And now if I do this, all 3 of these are sitting side by side. Okay? So now we have a ways of organizing these. We've seen how we can sit them side by side. Where are these different adapters at? Well, you'll find them up in Tools, Extensions. If you run down to Online, you'll find all of these different test adapters. Now, what I've got installed here is the Chutzpah test adapter. We'll go over that in a second. That's for our JavaScript, Jasmine and QUnit tests. We have the NUnit test adapter, which is in perpetual beta. If we scroll down a little bit, we'll find the XUnit test adapter, and I believe there's a few others that I don't have installed, but what you can do is just head out to Online and search for unit, and you'll find, most of the test adapters. Hey, there's the Chutzpah test adapter. Type unit test. See if we find any more. Yeah, there's the NUnit test adapter, some others. All right, so now we know how to find these test adapters. Let's see what it's like to use that Chutzpah test adapter. The Chutzpah test adapter allows me to add JavaScript tests. And that's really the reason why I had added this MVC application, for two reasons, really. One, I wanted to show that you can have tests in any kind of project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new folder in here. I'm going to call this specs, just kind of the convention we go with. And I'm going to add a new item, JavaScript file. New item. And we'll call this mymodule.test.js. Chutzpah also supports CoffeeScript if you happen to be using it. Feel free. All right, so let's take a look. The 2 frameworks that Chutzpah provides are QUnit and Jasmine. Now I'm going to use Jasmine's functionality here. Describe my module, and it asks for a callback. And in here, we're going to use it. This is where the actual test comes up. Is awesome. And then in here, we need to do some expectations. So we're going to say expect my module dot is it awesome dot to be truthy. All right, and truthy is our way of saying, hey, it's true. And truthy is our way of saying, is it true? Okay, and there's other ones you could say, hey, is it to be yes, something like that, and that'll be a comparison. You can find all those out at the Jasmine site. So the question is, let's go ahead and define that. So I build this. I just ran and saved it. If I head over here to the Test Explorer, after having built that, you notice a new test popped up that's got no traits, and that's called my module is awesome. Look at that, it pulls the describe and the it together to create a nice little kind of sentence, if you will. Now the question is, how do you add traits? Well, I have not found a way in Chutzpah to add traits to JavaScript tests. There may be a way. If I find out, I'll update this or put an annotation in the link. So let's start to define this. Let's fill this thing out. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a script in here. We'll add a JavaScript file and we'll call it my module.js. So it's in my scripts. And we got to ask, how does this get referenced over in our... So the question is, we have this test, and I'm going to put these side by side for us. How do I, in my module, or in my test for my module, reference the module.js? Well, JavaScript in Visual Studio has this reference tag we can put up here in kind of comments, and you might be tempted to use the tilde. Well, it turns out Chutzpah doesn't support that, so we'll need to do referential paths from where the test is and say, hey, dot dot slash scripts my module. And now Jasmine will, Chutzpah will have access to this test. And so now this thing is failing because it can't find my module. We'll fix that. And we'll basically say var my module, and we'll use the reveal pattern. Function, yes, it's awesome. Return true, oh, yes. And then we'll just return, is it awesome? Yes, it's awesome. Save that. And go ahead and run it. So we were, sorry. What we're doing is a function there. We're not actually calling that here. Let's do that. And we built it, saved it, it ran, and it's true. So what we've got here is a handful of NUnit tests, as well as MSTest and JavaScript tests running all side by side. Cool. So what's this idea? What do these traits give us? What do the categories give us when it comes to running tests? If you're big into this test room development thing or just in automated testing, you'll know that it doesn't take long for us to build up a catalog of tests that takes a long time to run. And you don't want to be turning that on and running those all the time. You want to be able to focus in and out depending on where you are in the development. So what the testing pyramid tells us is that we have kind of these different categories of tests, if you will, things like unit tests, and down there at the bottom, these are fast, they're focused, they are there to pinpoint a particular item and help us deliver on or help us validate or design a particular unit of code or component in our product. And because they're fast, because they're focused, you're probably going to have a lot of them. If you're good, you're going to have at least one per component, right? But then as we move up and get more kind of slow or extensive in the execution of our application, you might get into functional or integration tests. You're going to have less of those, not only because they're harder to create, but also because they're slower and they're harder to maintain over time. And so you'll have functional or integration tests. And then, of course, at the top, you might have specifications around your application, business-focused UI level integration tests. And depending on where you are in the development stage or the confidence or the composition of your components, you're going to want to focus your feedback loop or adjust your feedback loop because maybe while you're developing something or refactoring some piece of code, you're going to stick around down here in the unit level. And then once you've done your refactoring or built your components, you're going to start to run and build the functional tests to make sure you didn't break anything unexpected. And then finally, and when maybe when you check in or you're going to publish, a shelf set and a gated check-in or a buddy build that runs the full end-to-end suite of tests from unit to integration to UI. And this is a big part of that refactor cycle, the red-green refactor. So you've used red unit tests and then gotten them green, maybe even some integration acceptance and UI acceptance test. And then later on, you're going to use this whole suite to do really confident refactoring. And so this is a big part of this world here. So how do we use Test Explorer to get us there, to help us with that focused or that feedback loop at different stages? Well, what we get is the ability to fine tune what tests are running every build. So I may be focusing in just on my UI and want to be running and adjusting some of the JavaScript, moving maybe from I don't know, maybe we were using the Dojo framework or Knockout, and now we're moving to just some jQuery and maybe a Backbone or something like that, or an Angular. So what do you do? Well, maybe I want to say, hey, I just want to run the stuff around my module. Well, what you can do is you can use searching like full name. All right, if we type full name here as empty, we can say, hey, my module. And now only my module will show up here. We can also do that with some of the traits. Maybe we only want to run our build verification tests or our fast tests. Oops, I guess we don't have any fast tests. Oh, we have DAL. Maybe we're working in our DAL layer. So we can say, hey, trait is DAL. We could also say, hey, I want to run everything except my slow test. We can put a dash in front of trait and run slow. And so now I've got everything that's not slow, including my JavaScript tests. So we get a lot of different options here to run those types of things. We can also group just by project. Some teams like to do that. They'll put tests in different projects. Maybe they'll have an integration test project, a Selenium or coded UI test project, and a unit test project, and they can organize things that way. If you noticed some of those things, like trait, trying to think, trait, and in here project. I think just traits. Traits are new in update 1. So that update that came out in November, you'll have the option to filter by trait. If you don't have update 1 installed, you won't have traits and you'll have to use things like full name, which is not bad because you can create a convention that says something like, unit. And it'll only run my unit tests in here. Totally up to you. If you if you are online when you're running, which some folks are in a secure environment, you'll have to go out and grab the update and download it yourself. If you are obviously hooked up and ready, you should if you're obviously online. Extension and updates should prompt you for updates to the product. So you'll see in here update 1. If you don't have it installed already, you can click on that and download it automatically. And hey, look, I've got a Visual Studio Gallery update I need to pull down. All right, so using these different areas in here, we can go ahead and run it. Now, one of the questions that came up the last time I was talking about this was, hey, just because, is this just filtering the view on the test? Is it still running all of my tests in the background? No, that's not the case, and we can prove it. So if we clear this out, you'll notice that all of my tests are passing. We'll organize this by duration. Oops, not duration, outcome, I should say. And all of my tests are passing. If I filter this by NUnit or NU, and now go over and let's say I'll take my MSTest class and I'll fail one of these tests. If I save that, if I build, and I come over to Test Explorer, it's running my test right now, and everything's green. Everything's passing. And if I clear this filter out, it still shows, and in gray it shows the tests that were not run the last time. They're out of date, if you will. The results here are out of date. And so if I run all now, my test is failing. So this filter affects not only the view you get, but the tests that are run automatically by this run tests after build. All right, so what do we have here? In the new Test Explorer, one of the big features, one of the really great things that we want to take advantage of if we can is this continuous testing, a tight feedback loop, a feedback loop you can adjust depending on where you're at in your development. We get an extensible test runner that supports things like NUnit, XUnit, QUnit, Jasmine, MSTest if you really have to. You can organize all of your tests in different ways, by team, by category, by speed, by type of test. Go to town. If you happen to have any questions, hit me up on email. You can find me on Twitter at Cromwell Ryan. You can find out some of our blog posts and some of the things we do over at appliedis.com. And then you can always find me, and you'll find this video out at cromwellhouse.com. Thanks.